Hi class, Kristen here. I'm going to show you how to use After Effects now to finish off our experimental flipbook assignment. So here is the PSD, the Photoshop file that we were working in. It's got all those layers, those folders, those video groups, those video layers. Here is the export of that Photoshop timeline, but now we're actually going to ignore that export. We're going to continue working with this PSD file. We're going to import it right into After Effects and begin playing around with some of the things After Effects uniquely is able to do. So let's open up After Effects. I like to use Command Space and just type in what I'm looking for. Okay, we are going to make a new project. Let's save it. Save as. Hard drive. Assignment. Now let's call this. Okay, that's saved. Before we import, let's just set up organizationally. Two folders. Comps, short for compositions. Composition. And then another folder for elements. Let's select the elements folder, go up to File, Import, File, or select that, and then just type in Command I, and that's a shortcut to import. So let's import our Photoshop file, PSD, and this is important. Let's import it as a composition, and we want to retain layer sizes. There's different options here, and you can test each of them out. For now, let's try this one, retain layer sizes, and then open. And we have choices here again. Any um, any layer styles or effects that we might have put on in Photoshop, if we keep it editable, that means we can still adjust them here. But for now, let's just say merge everything into this layer footage that it will create. So it brings in our Photoshop PSD into two elements. Here's all of the layers, one big dump. Our folders are now represented by this icon, this composition icon, and then the regular flat folder, the regular flat layers are represented by this Photoshop icon. If I double click it, you see it's opening up in the footage window. These are just all of those individual layers, and it looks like it's on black, but really it's transparent. If I toggle this checkerboard, it shows me that it's actually transparent. So there's actually no color back there. But for now, let's leave this folder alone because we want to deal with the PSD the way we had organized it. Let's create a scene first. So let's click this composition icon. And let's call this our main scene. Make sure it's 1080 by 1920, 1920 by 1080. Actually, I think that's supposed to be the reverse. Let us look for a preset then. We can look for our HDTV 1080, and let's definitely keep it at 24 frames per second now. We want square pixels, 24 frames per second. All of this is fine. You can set your duration here if you like. So we know that our animation is 5 seconds long, so we can type that in. This is hours, minutes, seconds, frames. And go ahead and create that. So this is one way to just keep everything neat and clean. Your main comp, your main scene can live out here. Anything you import can go into the elements folder, and the comps folder will be any sub compositions that we might create while working in After Effects. So let's take our Photoshop file, which came in as a comp, and with I'm double clicking the main comp, it opens up in our timeline. Let's drag our PSD down here. And great, we can scrub through, we can see the animation happening. And if your computer is fast enough, you can turn off adaptive resolution. And if you scrub, it will show you what is the final image quality. Now we are at 25%. We zoom up. You can see all the beautiful textures from the Photoshop brushes we were using. Now, if your computer is slow, then you want to come back to this turn on adaptive resolution. And you'll see it temporarily gives you a lower quality preview while you're scrubbing for the sake of preserving a real-time playback so it doesn't lag. Now, these period and comma are the shortcuts for zooming in and out of your composition window. And I'm dragging, and you can see that the image quality really lowers. That's because I just want it to be fast and just have it keep up with me. But my computer can handle this. Anytime that you see this green part here, it means that your computer is storing the preview image of those frames. You can also come here, hit the play button. You'll see it's turning green. It's giving you that render preview of the frames that are happening. Okay, so here we kind of know what's going on. This is what we exported essentially coming out of the Photoshop timeline. But if we go inside this comp, this was our PSD file. If we go inside here, this is where things get fun. You'll notice that After Effects translated all of our folders from Photoshop into their own comps. So that means I can double click this and it'll show me all these layers inside. Remember, this black is just a placeholder. It's not actually color. If we turn on this checkerboard, then we'll see, oh yes, this is transparent. So let's come back out to our PSD. You can also use this little flowchart button if you get caught inside too many comps nested inside each other. Okay, so I mentioned before, if you twirl down these menus, After Effects also has a bunch of attributes that you can add keyframes to, but it's got more than what Photoshop can do. Let's add some position keyframes on this yellow swirl layer. Turn on the stopwatch, a keyframe automatically appears. And let's have this swirl now. Let's go to this tool, this arrow tool. Let's have the swirl move. So now it's slowly traveling across the scene while the animation is happening inside. If I go inside, look, here are all of those layers sequenced out. Remember, it's on a transparent background, but the black is easier to see. Does this look familiar? This is what it looks like in Photoshop. And so it's translated directly over into After Effects. Let's come back out. All right. So now my swirl is traveling. I can also have the swirl scale, meaning have it shrink a little bit. It can also adjust opacity. You can keyframe the opacity here. Keyframe rotation. Let's have these rectangles rotate then. I'm going to hit R, shortcut for rotation. And let's have it rotate here. So you can see it's rotating from the center point, which is fine. It looks like this. But if you actually wanted it to rotate from here, then we would just have to move the anchor point. So let's grab this tool, pan behind tool, pick up this anchor point and move it somewhere else. Now it's rotating from that anchor point. We can duplicate layers in After Effects as well. Let's create some more rectangles. I'm just going to do Command D for duplicate. Oops, go back to my regular arrow. I can move that around. Now I want to hit P for position just to make sure I didn't already have position keyframes happening here. Now I have that happening. Actually, I'll move it. Maybe I'll move it here. And I'll hit R. Let me get rid of those keyframes, but I do want to adjust the rotation. And I can slide this layer now back in time and just offset it. Now, there's actually two kinds of keyframes. So let me show you. Let's say we want this rectangle to be popping all over the place instead of smoothly traveling. So if you remember, turn on the stopwatch, a diamond keyframe automatically appears. Move forward in time, and if you change the position of the layer, you get this path, which you could actually change the shape of the path, and it will travel along that path. Now there's another kind of keyframe. This is called a linear keyframe because it's moving linearly. But there's another kind of keyframe. Let's try it here. Let's add a position keyframe. That's a diamond shape. Now, if you right click on that diamond shape, go to toggle hold keyframe, and then move forward in time. Let's drag this layer, move it around. You still see the path, but you don't get those handles anymore. You can't make it a curve. And look what just happened. It created a different shape keyframe. It's a square. So these are called hold keyframes. Let's add a few more. Select this. What a hold keyframe is essentially it just holds that position until you change it, until you add a different keyframe somewhere else. So let's just solo this layer so you can see what's happening. It's just popping to all these different positions. Now the animation inside it, we've got this little floating square coming out, right? That's happening inside the rectangle comp. This is what we did in Photoshop. If you come back out, and we added hold keyframes on the entire rectangle comp, that means it's popping to each position while whatever animation inside is happening is still continuing. So that's the difference between hold keyframes. It's very jumpy. It basically holds that position or it holds that placement until you change it, versus a linear keyframe. Let's solo that. Let me hit P for position. Linear keyframes are diamond shaped and it interpolates the space in between your two keyframes. It tweens it compared to a hold keyframe. So you can play with keyframes, add keyframes to your animation layers, see what you come up with. You can also play with some of the effects. Let's just save this, Command S, before we get too far. Now, to play with effects in After Effects, most effects are filters applied to a solid layer. So go up to Layer, New, Solid, and it will ask you what color you want to make it. We could make a brand new red solid layer, and it'll just automatically name it after the color. And it creates its own folder. Now we've got a red solid layer happening on top of everything. If we drag it underneath stuff, you can see I can even cut it, Command X, and then paste it inside this video group. Now remember, if we have transparency on, I can see one of my background frames has this white attached to it. That's something that I didn't fix in Photoshop, so we're stuck with it now. Otherwise, we would have to go back to Photoshop and fix it before bringing it in with the transparency. But I can paste that red solid underneath the blue, and every now and then it'll flash white and red. So let's come back out. Okay. So you can make solids of any colors, but let's make one, we can reuse the same one. Let's make one and apply a filter effect to it. So let's bring it in again, and let's go up to, let's try noise. Let's add some fractal noise to this. Okay, now if you hit E on a layer, it'll show you any effects that you've applied. Effects, fractal noise. Now we want to be able to change this, right? Let's make sure we go up to our effects tab. You can find it in the window, effects controls. And this is where you can start playing around. Just see what these things do. Anytime you see a stopwatch, it means that you can add keyframes. You can animate it. So here's all the different kinds of properties, and you can animate this. You can keyframe this. And we can even set keyframe on the evolution. Right now, nothing's moving. But if we keyframe the evolution, I'm going to hit U to show any keyframes. So let's keyframe evolution here, and then one at the end. You see that moving around? Let's give this a try. Okay, that's animating. And if we change this, this will add a little bit of that red tint to it. From our solid color red. Now, this is kind of interesting, but it's totally blocking all the animation underneath it. So now we got to blend it. Now, if you don't see this, you might just need to toggle your switches from switches to blending modes. So let's try that. Okay. Now there's different things happening. And of course, if we move this underneath the rectangles, then it won't affect the rectangles at all, but it'll affect everything underneath. So fractal noise is a great effect. People use it for all sorts of environmental effects such as clouds, what have you. and you can really play and control how it's affected. And we can even add keyframes out here. This is where you might want to add maybe a camera move. We can animate the scale on this. So at the end of our scene, let's say we scale it up just a tiny bit, and it'll feel like we have a camera move tracking into the scene. Of course, if you add position keyframes too, you could fake a panning camera move. Let's pan this over. Oh, I didn't set keyframe. Yes, I did. Yep. Let's set one at the beginning here. Oh, set one on the scale too. There we go. So now we have this sort of panning camera move while slowly zooming in. Now, of course, we ran out of screen here, right? That's actually transparent. So we might just need to make sure it's big enough for us to be able to pan in or zoom in. So play around with this. See how much you can alter what came out of Photoshop just by playing around with keyframes in After Effects, multiplying or duplicating layers, trying some effects on layers, and just see how far you can go with it. Let's save, and now let's render. Now we want to go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. And let's make sure all of our settings is what we need for class. Best quality, yes. Full resolution, 1920 by 1080, yes. Frame rate, 24, yes. Work area only, or we could change it to length of comp, but we didn't change the work area, so we can keep that. It'll be a 5-second animation. Great. That's the render settings. Now let's make sure our output format is what we need for class. This time, let's stick with a QuickTime movie. Let's change the format to Apple ProRes 422 HQ. And we don't have audio here. We don't want to resize or crop anything because we're already at 1920 by 1080. So let's hit OK. Now let's name our file output 2. Make sure we are at inside our proper folder with the proper file name. Let's call this version 2, and this will be .mov because it'll be a QuickTime file. And let's save that. Great. Now we can render it right here from After Effects, or you can send it to Adobe Media Encoder. If you have that installed, this will let you render in the background while you might continue to work in After Effects or Premiere. This Adobe Media Encoder will render in the background while you can still continue working. But for now, this won't take very long. So we'll just hit render and wait for the little bar to go. shortcut is if you hit caps lock on your keyboard, it'll actually render faster. It won't show you a preview of every frame. That's how it'll go faster. All right, that's good to go. Let's save and quit and check our file before we hand it in. There's our beautiful Photoshop animation with After Effects applied.